I want to live. Like, I want to live. There's nothing you can do about the fact you now have cancer. I keep on wanting to swear on this podcast. I don't know if swearing's allowed. Time after my chemotherapy and treatment finishes, like, I want to cycle around the world. That is my dream.
Знакомьтесь, это Люк, атлет, писатель и путешественник из Англии. 5 лет назад ему диагностировали рак 4-й степени, после чего он переосмыслил свою жизнь и решил воплотить свою давнюю мечту – отправиться в путешествие по всему миру на двухместном велосипеде и собрать денег для других онкобольных. Познакомились в 2021 году, когда он приезжал в Казахстан и даже сняли интервью, которое так и не вышло в свет. Но сегодня мы попытаемся рассказать его историю. Подкаст будет на английском языке, но мы добавили субтитры для вашего удобства, поэтому приятного просмотра!
Как дела, Люк?
Ну, очень хорошо. Ну, спасибо за возможность как разговаривать с вами здесь.
Да, thank you for coming to our podcast. We are very happy to see you because that's our very first episode.
It's like it's our first episode, and it's really hard to speak and to organize this.
Yes, but we're happy to see you here. Thank you.
No, guys, thanks for the opportunity. And I wish that my first ever podcast episode had been done as professionally as this. I did a podcast back during like the COVID lockdown, and it was me like in front of a laptop kind of doing Zoom calls with different people. But here you guys have got an amazing team. You've got proper microphones. You've got great lighting. It's just too bad you've got me as your first guest. But I'm sure the only way is up from here. So
thank you, man.
Thank you.
And a little backstory about how we know each other with Luke. In summer of 2021, Luke was doing his trip from Bristol to Beijing across the world, and he was driving through Kazakhstan. I saw an article in Tengri News about you and your journey, and I was so fascinated by you and your story. So I just found you on Instagram, I DM'd you, and then we met, had a little run, I guess, and even did a small interview. But it was lower quality than this one, but no.
We show it.
Yeah, I think we'll put some footage here. Yes, and that was how we met.
Yeah, it's funny because I really remember meeting you on that run as well, Akbar, and I think we had this, for me it was this fascinating conversation about like exercise and like why running is becoming more popular amongst Kazakh people, but then also kind of, I think we were talking about kind of like masculine stereotypes as well, I think. Yeah, and you were kind of explaining that to me. And maybe about meat eating, I think, as well. Was that right? And being vegetarian.
Yeah, because you were vegetarian at that period.
Yeah. I've decided it's too difficult right now.
What about now? You're not vegetarian.
I'm eating besh barmak. I'm samsi.
It's quite difficult.
Monty, here it's very
That's
difficult.
Our man.
Здесь очень сложно быть vegetarian, be a vegetarian here. So you can see my Russian is still needing some work. So.
No, it's totally fine.
Oh, it's really cool, Russian.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
That's why I'm here, to say the word vegetarian better.
That's very funny that you recalled so many memories from our first meeting, because I don't remember much. But I'm wondering, what was your first impression of me or our meeting or our interview? Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, I really remember meeting you, Akbar. You stood out. I think I don't know. Like, this is me coming in from like an outsider, right? Like I throughout this conversation, like I don't know much about Kazakhstan. From what I know of this country, I love it, but I wouldn't pretend to like try and understand it in any particularly deep way. But like, I guess when I spoke with you, I was like, oh, this is a really exciting part of like the young Kazakh generation, people with like lots of ideas, people who are kind of conscious about, I don't know, their health, their position in society, who've got loads of ideas. And then I think it was like the following day or like 2 days later, I was about to leave Almaty and carry on with the cycle trip to Bishkek. And I said, I think I had like an hour free if we wanted to like record a conversation. And you'd pulled together 3 or 4 different people. You'd found cameras, you'd found camera operators, all to do this conversation. I was like, wow, this guy he's really got his act together, like, and he's really keen and passionate, and I was super impressed.
Thank you for sharing. I didn't know that. And a little story about how we met. I told already Nikita about that. I was so captured by your story, and because I've never met people with such an experience who's been going through adventures like that with a goal and a mission to make something bigger than themselves. So I was so fascinated. And I remember at that moment when I texted you, I didn't have any plan for shooting or something. I just had an idea that I want to talk to
cameras
you.
Or what?
Yeah, I didn't know where to find cameras or people who would help me. And I just realized that I want to tell your story to the audience. And I remember the first time we met, it was in front of a botanical garden. And I expected that not many people are going to come to the meeting. And I expect that I'm going to be one of few people, so it's going to be pretty easy to come and talk to you and like get to know you better. But when I arrived to the botanical garden, there were so many people. They were professional runners, and they like were warming up. So I quickly realized that if I don't shoot my chance,
they will be faster.
Yeah, they will be faster. And if I don't shoot my chance, I might miss it. So I remember you didn't arrive yet. So I was just waiting, a little awkward, because now those people know each other, and they like talk, laugh, warm up.
It was like a community of runners?
Yeah, it was like a community. I don't know how do...
It was like a running group, right? I think it was a running group, and they all knew each other. And then it's always much more difficult when you're on the outside. Yeah. And I absolutely find that, I think we all find that, right? When there's like a group of people who are all friends, and you're like the one person who's like, hey, who wants to be my friend today? Like, like,
sure.
Hey, let me into your group. It's really difficult.
Yeah, that was so awkward. And I remember you arriving in a cab, and I was just standing there, realizing that they see you too. And I was like, I need to go now and talk to him. And just as you left the taxi, I came to you, I pitched you the idea that I want to make a Q&A with you and maybe shoot it. I didn't know at that moment whether it would be possible, but I just wanted to have a conversation. So you quickly signed up for that, and then the next day, I found people who helped me with cameras and etc. And that was an interesting experience. Unfortunately, this interview never came out because the sound turned out to be very poorly done. So at least now we're doing it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Finally making good on it. But I think one of the things that impressed me most, Akbar, was just like, I don't know if this is really correct or if this is a bit harsh, but I definitely noticed, like, in life there are the people who do stuff, and there are people who perhaps just don't necessarily do those things, but like people who take the initiative and like, okay, I'm going to make this happen. And I guess I'm very fortunate that I've had some experiences that have pushed me to becoming one of those people who, at least I try and make stuff happen, and I'll say I'll do something, and then I'll really try and do it. And I recognize that in you and like in your project, what you're doing right now. And I just think that's super cool.
Talk about project. Akbar told us about like you met with Luke and you realized that you want to do, like you started university.
Yes.
So that you realized what you want to really do, like about CoDreamers.
Yeah. At that period of time, I studied at the university. I think I was a
third year?
Yeah, third year student. And I was, my whole university life, I was wondering what do I want to do after I graduate, what do I want to become in the future. And I guess that's a big question for everyone. So in that period of time, I just was searching for people who might give me some answers or might share their experience with that. And I think Luke was that kind of people. And actually, you inspired a lot to start our YouTube channel, to start our journey. And thank you for that. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's just exciting to be here now. I expect we'll get the chance to sort of talk about it more later, but I think it's like an immense privilege to have like things happen to you and end up with a story, as I guess to an extent I now have, where by sharing it, it can have an impact on other people. And that sounds to me a little bit about what you're trying to do. You're trying to create your own story and also tell the stories of other people here in Kazakhstan, and the ripples from that, I think, could be quite profound, hopefully.
Thank you, man. And let's start from the starting point of our friendship. It's the summer of 2021. Tell us little about your life back then.
So do you want like the journey that sort of took me up into 2021?
Yeah, sure.
Well, let's like start by painting the scene of me at that point. I was cycling from Bristol to Beijing on a pink tandem bike. So it's like a 2-person bike. By that point, I'd probably had 150, 200 people join me on the back, and the idea was to share that journey with as many different people as possible. It was obviously the middle of the pandemic. The pandemic had probably started like a year and 3 months before or something. I'd kept on cycling through that. I'd gone through Ukraine. I'd been to Mariupol, not knowing what was then going to happen just like a year and a bit later. And I guess like a lot of people would be wondering sort of like, why do a trip like that? What drives you to, at the age of like, 25 years old, set off from your hometown and cycle halfway across the world? Like, why would you leave Almaty and try and cycle to Cape Town, like in South Africa? Like, what drives you to do that? And I guess for me, the answer was, this was something that really began a few years before. And as you guys know, I was diagnosed with cancer. I was 24 years old. It got diagnosed very late. I had this tumor the size of, I don't even know what, like a melon or something beneath my shoulder blade. It had spread to my lungs, but it was also like a very a rare form of cancer. And the doctors didn't really think they thought they could treat it with some chemotherapy and that would buy me some time. But really we were looking at like months, maybe a couple of years. Yeah.
Like
something like that.
Can you tell how it was? Like, you're 24 years old, so you're doing like your basic life, and how it was like you realized that you have a cancer. How did you feel?
It's a great question, Nikita, because like I think I would have expected it to be really obvious, right? Like, sort of if you have a flu, it's obvious that you're unwell. Like if you cut yourself, it's obvious that it's painful. And I think one of the surprising things in hindsight was it wasn't that obvious. Yeah. Even though now I look back at photos and I was like, how did I miss it? But the funny thing is that I was out in Russia at that time. I was in Tyumen in Siberia, trying to get my Russian good. It's been a dream of mine for many years to try and speak good Russian. Ну и еще я хочу говорить русский свободно, и еще нет. But and so I was just starting my adult life. I'd graduated from university. It was my first job where I was getting a pay packet. I was getting my independence. I'd left my parents behind. I'd just started competing in like ultra marathons out in Siberia. I'd formed this, but I joined this running group. I had these like different friendships forming. And through this time, occasionally I'd notice I'd have an ache in my left shoulder. It wasn't painful. It wasn't sore. It was just like an ache. And I'd make small adjustments without realizing it. So like if I was teaching English out in Tyumen, and in class I'd lean forward, like this. Because if I leaned back in my chair,
it would hurt.
Then it would press my shoulder against the back of the chair. Oh. And it would feel uncomfortable. It wasn't painful. It was just uncomfortable. And so without realizing it, I made these adaptations. And this went on for about 3, 4, 5 months from the beginning. And eventually I went to see the school nurse. And I was like, look, I don't, you probably just need to tell me I've got to take some paracetamols and it's fine. But like, can you have a look at my shoulder?
Yeah.
And she was like, take your top off. And I was like, here's the 6-pack. And she was like, no, I need to see your back. And she was like, Боже мой. And that was the first time I realized something was wrong. That there was something really serious wrong.
Yeah, it was just like school nurse, like not like professional doctor who
Yeah, exactly.
you can see like.
Yeah, just like the school nurse. And she was like, oh my God, what, like, have you had a car accident? And then I was like, no, like, and then basically what had happened is my shoulder blade had shifted round. It had looked like a balloon had like blown up underneath my skin. Like it was, when I took a photo, it was grotesque. And then I went back to the UK and, well, started treatment.
Do you remember what she thought? What were your first thoughts when you got diagnosed?
I got diagnosed sort of 3 weeks later. But by that point, I was pretty sure it was cancer. Yeah, it had taken me a long time to realize something was wrong. But like I was like, okay, this doesn't look good. But even at that point, I was like, it's gonna, that I'm gonna have some treatments. Maybe they're gonna need to cut off, cut it out, or maybe I'll even like lose my shoulder blade. And I remember joking with someone at the time saying, well, maybe I'm gonna get into the Paralympics. Because I'll have like a metal arm or something, and that'll be pretty cool.
No, you're really optimistic. Like you find a way, a solution.
Yeah.
But I was very much like, my background was in biology. That was my undergraduate degree, and so I was like, I believe in modern science. I'm 24 years old. It's gonna be fine. And basically, the doctors said, this is going to kill you, and it's going to kill you in a few months. Or
how much time do they predict, like, for you?
I think very sensibly, the doctors don't tend to put a number on things. Okay. But he said it was made more complicated because what they initially thought it wasn't, and it turned out to be even worse. But in terms of like the general expectations and prognosis. But the thing that he initially thought it was, he was like, maybe 2 years tops. And then it turned out to be an even more serious thing that I just never even asked, like, okay, give me the statistics for this, because let's not jump ahead. I mean, what was that moment like? It was it was absolutely shattering. Like everything. I was 24 years old and I'd just been told I'm going to die, and all the dreams that I had, all the expectations, everything that you just assume will, that you're going to live to 80, right? Like we all know we're going to live to 80. And like, there's no question that there's going to be opportunity to marry, have kids, climb the career ladder, have your house. Like that I never even doubted that was even ever going to not happen. And then suddenly I was being told that you don't have any time left to live, and like I went home and I just cried into the sofa. It was just it was the worst news imaginable.
Yeah, I can't imagine, because Akbar will be this year 24.
Like I can imagine if something like that happened to me, what would I do? Maybe I have some vision for that because I met you, but I don't think anyone is ready for that. I don't think anyone is prepared to be told that he might die in a couple of years. Life doesn't prepare you for that, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think unless you're being told it will never feel real.
And like your lifestyle, you're a runner and you do a lot of sports, but we cannot predict like our future or what will happen.
I think that was one of the things as well. Like I was the fittest person of any of my friends. I had a really good diet. I was a sports person. Like I was probably the last person you'd expect to get cancer. And it's difficult to sum up now, particularly after sort of, I guess, like getting on for almost for like 5.5 years of like how desperate that moment felt. but you're just like, I want to live. Like, I want to live. Like, I don't want to die. Like, I don't want to be dead for eternity. Like, I'm not religious. So like, I was like, I'm going to be just dead forever. I don't want, I want to keep on living.
So what was your plan for that period? Like, you realized that you have a cancer, you have like some treatment, so on. What was your plan?
Yeah, I mean, I think plan is putting it strongly. Like, you become very reactive to everything that happens, and like, I was living my life from one round of treatment to the next. So every 3 weeks I'd go into hospital for 4 days. I'd have like 4 days of chemotherapy, and then I'd have like 2 weeks of recovery. And initially I was on like quite large doses of like painkillers, basically like morphine, because of just how much it was, I guess by that point, like basically pain, like the aching had just turned into this constant, like a toothache, except it's across all of your like left back. It's one like giant toothache. So I was on painkillers, and I guess just initially the doctors didn't even know if like the chemotherapy would really work, and there's a good chance it wouldn't do very much. And yeah, so like, I remember I had the opportunity to start a master's at Oxford in the October, and I started treatment in July. And the idea that I'd actually be able to start this master's course at Oxford was just inconceivable, because I was like, I'm probably going to be on my deathbed. Like, I'm probably going to be having second or third rounds of treatment, like emergency sort of, or experimental therapies. Like, and that didn't seem at all real at the time.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing that's worth saying here in terms of like strategy is that on that day I was diagnosed with cancer, my dad said, let's go for a run together. You're going to feel better if you get outside, get those endorphins. And he gave me some advice then, and he said, Luke, like, as your father, my son getting cancer is like the worst thing I can imagine. Like, that's the stuff of my nightmares, and like, so any parent would be just like, never let this happen to my kid.
Yeah.
And it happened to my dad, and his kid, me. Because like, there's nothing you can do about the fact you now have cancer. But what you do have a choice over is how you live with cancer, and you might only have a few months left to live. And that sucks, but like, what are you going to do in that time?
Yeah.
Like, that's the most important thing. What are you going to do in the time that you have? And that really got me to think much more positively about like, not how little time I had, but what am I going to do in the time that I do have? And what can I do to give myself the best possible chance of survival?
Yeah.
Because the statistics were like really rubbish. I keep on wanting to swear on this podcast. I don't know if swearing's allowed, but
yeah, sure. Go.
But like, yeah, no, the statistics were really shit. Basically, they were like, you're dead. And I was like, what can I do to be in that 1% of people? Like, what can I do that's going to maximize, not guarantee, but maximize my chances of being in that 1%?
And as you said, you contemplated a lot about death at that period, and definitely ask yourself, what do I want to do before I die? And what was that you come up with at that period?
So in that hospital room, at the day I was told, I had stage 4 cancer, like, quite deep down in my mind kind of bubbled up this thought that there was a dream that I'd had probably since I was like 14 or 15, which was to cycle around the world. And I'd always thought I'd do that, I don't know, sort of later, probably like after university, but then after university I got a job, or like, I don't know, at some point in my life I was like, I want to cycle around the world. And I realized like it's got to happen now. Like, there literally is no later. So if I've got a time after my chemotherapy and treatment finishes, like I want to cycle around the world. That is my dream. Like that is literally what I want to do with my life. And if I've only got a year and then I'm dead, like in that final year, I want to cycle around the world. Boom. There we go. That was it.
And where does that dream come from? What's the origins?
It's a good question because it's a bit of a random dream, isn't it? I think it's probably like some people's idea of like a bit of a nightmare, like having to cycle that far, like that much sort of physical discomfort. I guess it probably comes from a couple of places. One was my family. We weren't like really like team sporty. You know, we weren't good at like football or cricket or rugby or something, but we did a lot of like running and cycling together, and our family holidays tended to be like cycling around the UK or in Europe, which I suppose just became normal for me, even though as a child I didn't like it. It felt so tough. I mean, I can do it now, but like as a kid, you're just like constantly complaining, constantly being bribed with food, always asking when are we going to stop next, like not wanting to cycle or like run or walk. But I think it's left me with a legacy of loving exercise, which now I feel very grateful for. But at the time, I did not like it. And so I think that's where the exercise component came, and an appreciation of traveling by bike, which gets you to meet a lot more people. I think you're a lot more in touch with your surroundings. And if you're in a car, you can just, you can put the aircon on, you can close the windows, and you can kind of shut out the environment, but you can't do that on a bike. And I think the second part of this was like solidified after I finished school and I started traveling. I spent a year and I worked in Nigeria, in the Middle East, in Russia, Cambodia. And it like opened my eyes up to the world. And I was like, my God, like A, the UK is boring. B, the rest of the world is like so interesting. Like, give me more of this. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the two came together to give me sort of, Bristol to Beijing.
Great. I didn't know that, actually. Yeah. But
how many people in your family?
So we started as 4. I don't know if you guys know this, maybe Akbar, you know this, but my brother died during my first round of chemotherapy. So he was older by 18 months, and he was running in some hills in the UK and just and was just incredibly unlucky and fell.
And can you tell us a little bit more about your brother? Because as I know, he had a great influence on you. And
yeah, I mean, John, he was very academically gifted, like incredibly smart. He cruised through school without even trying. I mean, like literally, like we would revise for exams the night before and end up with the top marks. And that's not like an exaggeration. Like he went to Cambridge University, Trinity College to study mathematics, which is like the place. It's like the best of the best of the best. And he was there. And I guess that's difficult growing up, like your older brother is that gifted. And like, I guess by comparison, I always felt a bit stupid. I don't think I'm stupid, but in comparison with John, I mean, he had this different level of like intellect and logic, and trying to argue with him was impossible because he would always outthink you. And I guess we were very competitive, particularly like in cross-country running in school, and then he went to university and started rowing, and then we came together later both cycling. I did triathlon, he got into cycling, and we had a lot of like very competitive cycle rides. And he was doing a PhD at Cambridge at the time in mathematics. I don't know. Any more questions? I don't know what to say.
Thank you for sharing. And does the idea for your cycling trip comes from your shared dream with your brother to cycle the world?
So it's something, there were like, 3 weeks between getting diagnosed and John dying, where I think started discussing this idea, which was so hypothetical because it didn't even seem like I was going to live to start the ride. But the hope was that we were going to cycle it together and probably do it on 2 different bikes, and then just cycle alongside each other and do this big trip together. And I guess when John died, I realized that I still wanted to do this trip with other people, but like almost no one is as fit as John and like is going to be able to keep up with me on the bike. And I'm not very patient. Like I wouldn't be able to wait for people. So the perfect solution seemed to be doing it on a tandem where you're both moving at the same speed, and it makes it a lot more accessible. And I think, John is a part of that, of the ride. And we named the bike after John. Like his second name was Christopher. Like in the UK we have middle names, John Christopher Grenfell-Shaw, and we named the bike Christopher. So he was kind of part of that.
Can you say that your ride was a tribute to your brother?
In part, but it's much more complex than that. I think the easy answer is just to say, like it was just all, it was in memory of John, but it was also much more than just John's death. It was also, I guess, about my life. And like part of the way I dealt with my brother dying, I guess, was in some ways to be very selfish about my own life, which was made easier because I had cancer.
Yeah.
So like I was literally, there was no survivor's guilt because I was literally also fighting for my life, and I was just like, I need to try and survive. And so I think the ride, as much as it being about sort of being in memory of John, it's also about seizing life in my own life as well.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. It's really hard.
Yeah, that's a difficult topic to talk about, but I guess people who might be going through something like that might see that this podcast, listen to you, and maybe get something out of it. So thank you for sharing.
I mean, I think that's I do find it really difficult to talk about John. I don't, unless there's enough space given to it. But I think for me, one of the reasons I feel it's really important is because so many people would have looked at me as the person with cancer and being like, okay, it's okay for him to live his dreams because we know he's only got a year left to live, or a couple of years or a few months. But I think most people will go around thinking, well, I don't have cancer. Yeah. I'm not about to die. Sure. Yeah. That doesn't apply to me. Luke's story doesn't apply to me. And I guess to me, that's where like John is such an important part of this narrative, because like no one would have thought that I'd be the person that left alive today. And so it's like, none of us know how long we got. So like, why do we put off our dreams? Like, why do we put off what's important? Because we have this convenient truth that we're going to die when we're like 80 or 90 or something. And actually it could happen tomorrow. Yeah,
sure. And I think that's one of the core ideas behind our project.
Yeah.
Because when we did our list, we asked ourselves, okay, if we would have died soon, what do we want to do before that?
Okay, like back to reality and tandem.
Yeah.
Like, how did you raise money for your trip?
Yeah.
What's difficult? What did you do? How did you pitch the idea of your dream?
So I guess we were raising money for 2 things. The main thing we were raising money for were cancer charities. So we were raising money for some UK-based cancer charities and then like locally based cancer charities through the countries that I passed through. Then we also, of course, had to raise money for the ride itself.
Yeah.
And we got money from 2 sponsors there. Since then, I've also, we had to raise money for the documentary film we're making, which has been a very difficult process, and I think has taught me that, like, no one just gives you money. Like, everything that you read online or saying, like, you have to add value to the other person is true. Yeah. Like, you have to have an idea that, like, is different, and then you also have to give evidence that you've got a product that is either better or different.
Yeah.
And I think the short answer that I've come up with is that you have to work a lot for free to start with. You either we were very lucky with the cycle ride. We got a significant amount of money from a couple of sponsors, and I think that's partly because of the story that by chance I now have that is quite a compelling one. But for the film, it's been really difficult, and me and Mike is the director of the film, I'm the producer. We've worked, haven't got paid a single penny, and probably don't expect to get paid unless we can manage to sell the film. We worked for probably 3 years on this project, and we've now got a really good-looking rough cut. Now people are interested. Now they can see the rough cut, and they can see, this is a real film with a really good story, good for cinematography. But until you get to that point where you've got a product you can show people, I'm not sure. It's really difficult to get interest.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what about numbers? First thing is how long did the trip last? The second thing is how much money did you raise for the charity?
So the trip itself started on the 1st of January 2020, and it finished on the 19th of June 2022, which was my 4-year cancer diagnosis anniversary. So it lasted about 2.5 years, but during that time was the pandemic. And I spent 6 months back in the UK when the pandemic first happened. So it was about 2 years on the road. And I had in total 800 different people join me on the bike.
Yeah.
It went through 30 different countries. And as you said at the beginning, 30,000 kilometers. Regardless of how much money we raised £130,000 for these cancer charities.
But your initial goal was like 30,000, right?
Initial goal was 23,000.
23,000.
And we broke that within about a week or 2 weeks of starting. And then we decided we needed to go for more.
That's great.
Keep on pushing. Yeah.
Okay, back to timeline. So for our viewers, you realize that you have cancer, then you started your
treatment.
After you realize that your brother died. So what you do before you
before the trip?
This
how's the treatment going?
Yeah.
How's that period?
So I was diagnosed in June 2018. Started treatment in July 2018. John died at that same time. Then I had chemotherapy through till October 2018, and actually I managed to I started at Oxford for my master's while still on chemotherapy. I was there at university. I had no hair, I had no eyebrows, I had no eyelashes. I had my surgery and radiotherapy whilst I was at Oxford, which at times was really, really low. There were very emotionally low points. I remember radiotherapy does bad stuff to your skin, right? It basically, my whole back, basically the whole shoulder turned into a whole spotty infected mass, and my t-shirt was gross, and I was in lectures, and I was just really miserable because everyone else was just being young, and I was going every morning to have radiotherapy, and that was quite shit. But got through that. I was still alive. So then we're kind of moving forward to sort of summer of 2019, which was longer than I thought I was going to live to begin with. And that's when I started thinking, am I serious about the cycle ride? Okay. We need to start planning this. And, but still having scans every 3 months and kind of expecting that each scan that would come back would be okay.
Yeah, that's it.
That's it. You need more treatment. We're trying second line therapy, third line therapy. But then the funny thing, particularly given that where we're recording this, is I had this opportunity to teach at the University of Central Asia in Kyrgyzstan, in Narin. And that came up in the autumn of 2019. Yeah. And it just seemed like a super cool opportunity. I'd always wanted to spend time in Central Asia. So as we were preparing for the ride, because that took quite a lot of time, I was working out in Kyrgyzstan. In Narin at the University of Central Asia. And then I started the ride on the 1st of January 2020.
What would you generally advise to someone who's going through something similar, might be going through treatment from a cancer or any other disease, or maybe going through some depression? What would you recommend them? What's your advice?
I think I'd probably start by saying I can't pretend to know how other people feel.
Yeah.
And that was one of the most annoying things when people came up to me and said, I've had cancer too, I know how you feel. And I was like, F off, like, you don't know how I feel. You know, sure, you've had cancer, but we've got totally different types of cancers, totally different outlooks. You're 50, for God's sake. Like, I'm only 24. Like, how can you... I would give anything to live to 50. Like, even now, 50 is like... That would be just incredible. Whereas for most people, that sounds really young. But from my perspective, I'm like 50. Like, I mean, 30. I'm coming up to 30. That's so much more than, you know, longer than I thought I'd live. So I think I'd start by saying I don't know what people are going through, their situation. But for me, the mindset that worked is like, what can I do to help myself? What can I do to boost my own chances of survival? Like, I can't control whether I have cancer or not.
Yeah.
And I guess anyone listening to this, you know, if you've got cancer, that really sucks. Really sucks. But you can't, you know, that's happened. Okay, so what are you going to do from this point onwards? And I think coupled with this is the idea that often we think we need to like protect, shelter, nurture people who are going through like diseases or difficult times. And I think there's a bit of that is really important. But wrapping someone up in cotton wool ends up robbing them of their independence and ends up like infantilizing people. You know, you stop people being independent human beings, right? So I was really grateful that my friends, when I was going through treatment, they treated me the same as before.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't treat me any different. They weren't like, oh, you should be in bed.
Yeah.
You know, like, I think the attitude of like, oh, you should be in bed, don't get out of your chair, let me bring you a cup of tea.
Yeah.
Nah, like, go outside, be as active as possible. You might make some mistakes, you might sometimes do too much, but in my opinion, it's much better to do a little bit too much. Learn that, you know, where your limits are.
Yeah.
And then sort of just say, oh, you should just lie in bed all day or something.
Yeah. And when you got diagnosed, you did so many incredible things that people who are living their normal life are not willing to do. Like, you got admitted into Oxford. You ran marathon.
Half marathon, yeah.
Half marathon. Was it your first half marathon?
No, I'd come from a background a lot of running, and that was massively beneficial for me.
Yeah.
Going into treatment, I was already pretty fit. I was pretty strong. So I tried to maintain that.
Was it difficult to run a marathon while were you going through chemo at that period?
Yeah, after the marathon, it was a half marathon. So after the half marathon, I actually went into the hospital to get a blood test done to make sure I was okay to start the chemotherapy the next day. And the next day I went in and started the chemotherapy. And I came in with my finisher's medal and my running kit, and they're like, you know, seeing if I'm okay to start chemotherapy. And I'm like, I think I'm probably fine. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. Like, I wouldn't want to say my experience is typical because I came in from that very high level of fitness.
Yeah.
But the point, I think, isn't about running a half marathon. It's about being as active as possible.
Yeah.
And if that means walking around your apartment block once a day, that's great. If it means going for a half an hour walk, that's also amazing. I think it's about working out what your limits are and going right up to them sustainably. But I think physical activity is like one of the most powerful things you can do to help yourself. And like, to me, that's what I would advise above all. Be as physically active as possible.
Okay, let's move on to the next blog. And we would like to know more about your life before the Bristol to Beijing, about your childhood, and what were your dreams as a child? What did you expect your life to be like before all of the cancer thing? And
yeah, I think before my cancer, I think I was probably hoping to work in international development, possibly as a plant scientist. I'd done biology in my undergrad. I was thinking about doing a PhD. I was probably going to do a PhD, possibly going to start working for a consultancy in the UK.
Yeah.
And I think part of that, I had sort of like intellectual hang-ups of like a PhD is like the highest level of academic achievement. My brother was doing a PhD. I felt that was probably something I ought to do, which is a terrible sign if you think there's something you have to do, but it means you don't actually want to do it. So I think my life has taken a much more positive path. But yeah, I think at that point, my plan was to work in... I still loved traveling. I still wanted to do something good in the world. And I guess I thought the best way of doing that was to be a plant scientist and help with like, drought or, like saltwater resistant crops or something like that. But as a child, I didn't really have many dreams. As a teenager, I wanted to be a professional cricketer, but I was really bad at cricket. It was one of these terrible... The mismatch between my ambition and my level was insane. Like I was just very, very, very average at cricket, and I wanted to be very, very, very good, and I just was not. So for a long time, that remained a dream. That was, I guess that was only ever going to be unfulfilled. But and at that time, I guess a dream that I had was I really wanted to be a sponsored cricketer, because you see like the cricketers and they've got their, whoever it is, the cricketing brands that, sponsor you. And I suppose that in some ways I've come a full circle on that now, because with running, I'm sponsored by Brooks. And for me, that was a huge deal at the time. And it still is a huge deal. I feel very, very proud, partly because I ran in their shoes anyway for about 13 years before.
Wow.
But like, it's like a kind of dream come true. Someone's like, we think you're really good at this. Like, we're actually going to sort of, pay you money to do this. For me, that's very cool.
That's a dream come true.
It is a dream come true. It genuinely is a dream come true. Yeah.
Great. And how do you describe yourself? How do you introduce yourself to new people? Are you author? Are you runner? Are you traveler? How would you describe?
Here I introduce myself as Luka. Потому что, Люк — это в кухне, резем лук, или, как на дороге, как крыша, можно сказать, да, Люка.
Крышка.
Люк, да. So yeah, like I try and introduce myself here as Luka. I don't know. I mean, it's a big question of identity, isn't it? Yeah. I probably say, what do I say right now? I say, меня зовут Люка, я режиссер, тоже я бегаю в горах, и сейчас я пишу книгу. Наверное, да.
Yeah.
Классно. У Люка на самом деле хороший русский.
Да, он стесняется.
Да, стесняется. Он даже крылатые выражения использует. Крылатые выражения, использует, все понимаю.
Да.
Отлично.
Мне кажется, нам надо записать новый подкаст.
На русском.
Да, давай. Продолжаем на русском.
Можно вернуться вот к Tandem Ride? Там просто интересные вопросы были.
Да, давай. Go.
Хорошо.
Okay, Luke.
Yeah, okay, back to English.
Okay, back to English. So, I really want to know what the process was. Like, you started from England and you go through the world by bicycle, and it's really interesting to know what's happened, like maybe some interesting stories with the guys who was with you and how it was hard, or maybe how you fixed your bicycle.
Yeah,
because I can imagine it's quite difficult go by car or by plane, go through the world, and you did it with a bicycle with tandem. So tell about this more.
Yeah,
I guess there are many different stories and like different things that went wrong and different challenges. I think there was I guess there are sort of three types of challenges. I think there were like physical challenges. I think there were like technical challenges. I mean, things that went wrong with the bike.
Yeah.
And then I think there were like the mental challenges. And without a doubt, the mental challenges were the greatest. I'll try and give a quick example for each. So physical challenges, to me, I came from a background of, of being pretty fit, but, like crossing the Pamir Highway in Tajikistan, pretty much all above 4,000 meters, that was just lung busting. There were just times when you were just like absolutely gasping for air, but more or less I knew I was always going to get to that point. I think the physical challenges tended to be greater for the people who were amazing at coming well out of their comfort zone and joining me on the back. People who weren't used to cycling, and actually me trying to sort of be look after them, I suppose, was for me like a bit more of a challenge.
You tell them like faster, man.
Yeah, of like I got used to, I could just pedal for like 3 hours at a time, and that would I wouldn't be tired. And I'd have to be, and I don't think I was particularly good at it, but like be really understanding of, let's stop every half an hour, let's stop every hour, let's have tea breaks, let's adjust the saddle, let's make sure they're really comfortable. Yeah. It's something I could have been better at, but that was one challenge. Okay, technical challenges, stuff with the bike, quick crash course on the bike, literally and metaphorically. It's about 20 or 30 kilos itself, the bike. It's quite big because it's 2-person. There are lots of bags on it. So you're looking at about 70 kilograms in total. Plus 2 people, and you're looking at about 200 kilograms as a moving unit. And one story that I'll tell you is we were cycling from Bishkek to Osh. And we were on the road from the Toktukul Reservoir, kind of going up into the mountains. And we'd gone all the way up, and then we're coming back down. And it's like the road towards like Jalalabad. And it's this really steep road that goes on, just like keeps on going on and on and on. We start going really quickly. I mean, 60, 70 kilometers an hour. We're overtaking lorries and trucks, and there are cars that we're whizzing past. And I was like, we're going way too fast.
What about weather? How it was?
Weather was fine. This was summer. So yeah, the weather was just fine. And I'd been joined by an American girl who I'd met in Tashkent, and she'd come along for a week. We didn't really know each other that well. But she was up for the adventure. So we're there together, the two of us hurtling down this Kyrgyz hillside. And I was like, we're going way too fast. So I kind of use the brakes, and I slow us right down. We're going at maybe 15 kilometers an hour. And I'm like, that was too fast. That was too close. We just need to stop. So I pull really hard on the brakes, and we don't get any slower. And we start getting a little bit faster, and we're still on this steep hill. And so we're getting faster and faster. I'm pulling hard as I can on the brakes, and they're just not working.
It's not working.
The brakes have stopped working. They've overheated. I mean, you could fry an egg on those brakes. That's how hot they were. And so I'm just like, oh my God, we have no brakes. We are going down a really steep hill. There's someone on the back of this bike who I'm meant to be looking after.
Do they have helmets?
Yeah, we were wearing helmets at that point. We were wearing helmets. We did wear helmets to the downhills, yeah. And I was like, Carolyn, we got to jump. And you imagine being Carolyn. You join this crazy Brit who's cycling across the world. She's literally putting all her trust in my hands, in those handlebars, and now the brakes aren't working. And I'm telling her to jump off the bike. And we're going at about 20 kilometers an hour and getting faster and faster.
And how did you eventually stop?
Well, we got to you see, the truth is, I'm a bit of a scaredy cat deep down. And I realized we had to jump from the bike, but I didn't really know how to jump from the bike. I was here on the bike, and I was like, what do I do? Do I sort of go forwards? Is that how you jump from a bike? I don't know. Do you jump from the side? But that seems kind of difficult.
What approximately speed was for understanding?
I think we were going at 20 to 25 kilometers an hour. So not super fast, but
when you
quite
drive
fast.
at 200 kilograms, that's pretty.
Yeah, and when you're on a bicycle, I think it's different.
It feels fast enough. Maybe we're going at 30 kilometers an hour. I'm not sure. I wasn't paying attention. But yeah, this is where teamwork comes in handy, because I don't know how Carolyn had spent her childhood, but I think she'd spent part of her childhood tossing herself off bikes, because she knew how to jump from a bike. She threw herself off to the left, the bike went off to the right, and I just went straight forward, sailed over the handlebars. And I had this glorious moment where I was like, Superman. And then I just crashed on the earth. I just cut up, and yeah, like we were like both like bleeding from our arms, our legs, but I mean, you know, slava Bogu, we didn't break any bones. So like it was a lucky escape.
Я говорил, Люк знает крылатые выражения.
Да.
Слава богу.
Well, earlier I wanted to get us. Oh, we can talk about it later. But there's a Kazakh, like an expression about Kazakhs I thought was quite interesting. Of like, Kazakh без пунктов, это беспунктный казак.
Да, без понтов.
Без понтов, без понтов. And like when we were talking about the job and the house, Kazakh без понтов, беспонтовный казак.
Yeah, you know,
Без понтов.
we like doing this, like show everything from your pocket. Like if you go like, this is my phone, iPhone 14 Pro, this is my wallet with a lot of money, this is my AirPods, the last one, and like show our ponti for everyone.
It's super interesting for me to like learn about that sort of stuff.
Yeah. And about mentality?
Yeah. Final, I guess, part was like the bit that I found most difficult. And I think that was ultimately, it came from sharing my story a lot, and it came from being very public about what I was trying to do and being on a pink tandem, and particularly in India, Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. We just attracted so much attention. It was just mentally very, very draining. I mean, we were very fortunate that we were able to meet a lot of people and people were engaged. But it basically led to my kind of burnout, basically. I was just like mentally checking out because I just couldn't keep on talking. So that was like the overall, like the most difficult thing.
Did you try to like talk each people about your story and why you're doing this?
I mean,
repeat it again.
It gets. I found it difficult. I've got immense respect for people who are able to engage with people and all the time and tell them their story and just take photos and selfies. But like, there were days when we'd have like 30 or 40 or 50 people whilst you're cycling saying, "Selfie, bro, selfie," and you're just like, "Hey, I'm just cycling along, can you leave me alone?" And like, maybe that's not a great attitude to have, but it's the one I did have at that time. And so it's amazing that people were like really engaged, and it's also kind of what I wanted and I asked for, but ultimately I just wasn't really able to sort of withstand that amount of attention. And I think if I did things differently, I'd like schedule in like more breaks or like de-stress times or something.
Yeah, I think you should be careful with what you want because you might get it.
Yeah, this is very true. This is very true. Wise words, Akbar.
And let's move on to the end of your trip.
Yeah.
To how did it end it and when?
So, I mean, it'd been my dream to cycle to Beijing, Bristol to Beijing. And the reason for that, if anyone's wondering why, like, to Beijing, I was really interested in the Belt and Road project. So, the sort of Chinese big infrastructure project that sort of stretches across the world, and like the new Silk Roads, the old Silk Roads. And I'd studied Arabic, I'd studied Russian, and I'd sort of gradually my interest had been traveling east across Eurasia, and it sort of seemed like the natural point to finish in China. But the problem was that COVID was still a thing, at least in China. The borders were closed, and despite trying for several months, I wasn't able to get into China. Which then gave a big question, like, what do you do? If your dream is to cycle to Beijing and you can't get to Beijing, what do you do? And it was a difficult time, and I sort of thought for quite a couple of weeks about it, and I decided that I didn't want to just put my life on hold and wait for this to happen.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, what can I do that feels right, that feels like that I still have integrity and credibility, that I'm like completing the ride.
Yeah.
And I decided I would go back to London and I'd cycle the remaining distance, which was about 3,300 kilometers, the distance from where I was to Beijing. And I'd do that in London, and I'd invite people from around the world who happened to be in London to join me.
Yeah.
So that felt like it was sort of the still very much in the spirit of the ride. I was still doing the distance. I was still doing it with other people, even if I wasn't able to do it in China. So that's kind of how we finished the ride. And I had I think over 400 people join me that month. We raised a load of money for charity, the cancer charities. So yeah, it still felt like a really special thing to do.
Wow, that's great to know that you managed to do it, even if you had some obstacles on your way. And how did you feel at the moment when you finished your journey? Was it a satisfaction or was it a bit of sadness?
Great question. I haven't thought about that for a long time. Yeah. I think there was a lot of joy in that moment. I think particularly because so many of my friends, I think 150 people were there, my kind of closest friends, community were there, and there was such an amazing atmosphere, and to be able to hug my mum and stuff was really special in that moment. I think I'd be lying if I said that wasn't a part of me that's this should have been in Beijing. I really wanted to finish this still, quote unquote, properly. But you have to accept that this becomes part of your own story and your own narrative. And it was still a very special way to finish the ride. And I think it came at the right time because I was, as I said before, I got to the point where I was quite tired, mentally tired.
Yeah.
What did trip teach you? Your whole trip? Yeah. Maybe 3 points or
I mean, difficult to sort of so many different things, and I guess a lot of the lessons are relatively subtle, but a few that I'll try and pick out. I think one, in my opinion, it's easier to do a big thing than a small thing. In terms of trying to get money or attention or get people excited about your vision. It's a lot easier to get people excited about cycling to Beijing than Brighton. Brighton being a town on the south coast of the UK, about 100 miles away from Bristol. So if you tell someone a big vision, everyone gets excited.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing I really took away from it. I think maybe the second thing is just start and you get better later.
Yeah.
To begin with, you're am I writing this sponsorship email or am I doing this slide deck right? Maybe it's not finished. Just do it, get it out. And to be honest, you're going to have to write that slide deck, 50 times. It'll be good by the 50th time. But right now, let's just write it the first time. Yeah. I think that's perhaps one other message. I think a third thing that was really important for me was having a team. And that made a huge difference. I haven't talked about the team, but there was a team of volunteers who were amazing. They made the ride what it was. They did everything from the website to social media to the finances, logistics, organization, keeping records of who joined, liaising with different people who are joining. And so that was a huge part as well. So I think building a team and the support of the team, I think was also huge.
And how many people was on your team?
The team varied in size at different points, but it was usually about 7 or so people. 7, 8, somewhere between 6 and 9 usually, I think.
And with the end of your Bristol to Beijing trip, do you close a chapter of your life? Would you say that?
Not yet, because I think the end of the trip comes when the film and the book have been completed and their life cycle of releasing them, hopefully getting them publicized and read by different people. I think that will be this sort of chapter completed. And so those are the main projects I'm working on now. But then there are already other projects for later down the line that are, you're still working away on other stuff.
We'll wait your book.
Yeah, we'll wait for your book and for your documentary. And when this chapter ends, how would you call it?
Oh, I don't know. It's a good question. What would I call this chapter? What would you call this chapter from the outside, Akbar?
Well, I would say that's the start of your journey, actually.
Okay. The beginning.
The beginning, yeah.
It's like Lord of the Rings,
Yeah, I think there are a lot more adventures that you have in the future.
We'll see.
For sure.
Yeah.
Hope so.
Okay, let's talk about
your current life.
Okay. Yes. В Казахстане.
And
why Kazakhstan?
Yeah, why Kazakhstan?
by Kazakhstan. Can we do this in Russian? Or I feel like I should be saying this in Russian.
Yeah.
Мне очень нравится Казахстан. По-моему, я помню, когда я был здесь во время приключения Бейжинг, я встречал многие люди, добрые люди, дружелюбные люди, гостеприимные люди. И, уже... когда несколько месяцев назад я подумал себе, что я хочу практиковать мой русский язык, тоже я хочу бегать в горах, где я хочу жить. И сразу я думал, Казахстан, Алматы. Уже у меня друзья здесь, есть прекрасные горы здесь. И, конечно, я могу говорить на русском. Еще на казахском только чуть-чуть. Рахмет, саламат сбой. Салам алейкум. Еще только мало, к сожалению. Это причина. Я здесь, потому что я хочу практиковать мой русский язык. Бегать в горах. И, наверное, это все.
И откуда... Давай тогда этот
на
вопрос
русском,
сделаем
на русском,
да?
да.
И откуда такая вообще любовь к изучению русского языка?
Интересный вопрос. Я изучал русский язык в школе, как случайно. Вообще в Англии нет возможности изучать русский язык в школе, только французский язык, испанский язык. И, по-моему, это очень интересно. Интереснее, чем французский язык. Россия интереснее, чем Франция или Германия. И, когда я работал в Кыргызстане, я узнал Центральной Азии. И, очень дружелюбные люди здесь, прекрасная природа здесь тоже. И, честно говоря, я не знаю, почему я хочу говорить на русском, но просто это цель моя цель, да.
Да, я помню нашу первую встречу. Акбар говорит, вот приехал мой друг Люк, он с Англии, я готовил свой английский, чтобы сейчас примерно рассказать себе. Прихожу, и Люк, привет, как дела? Меня зовут Люк, и я очень удивился, потому что вот Люк, который разговаривает на английском, и Люк, который разговаривает на русском, как будто вот две личности, и все в тебе. Это прикольно осознавать. Еще всегда удивляюсь, когда реально Люк знает крылатые выражения, еще использует их в тему.
Да, вот очень.
То есть в контексте,
хорошо, да. Я думаю, что когда я говорю на русском, дает мне как энергия.
Да.
Я не знаю почему, но просто мне нравится.
Классно. Давайте тогда поговорим о беге.
Да.
Вот, Люк у нас бегает в Алматы.
Да.
Расскажи, вот, как проходят твои тренировки. Чуть больше о беге, наверное, да. И в целом хочется поговорить еще о комьюнити бегунов и скайранеров в Казахстане, потому что недавно вот столкнулись, и интересно эту тему тоже тронуть.
Да. По-моему, это очень круто тоже, что здесь, есть как сообщество, комьюнити скайранеров, трейлранеров, люди, которые любят горы вообще. И, по-моему, это очень
особенность.
Особенность Алматы. Я бегун. Я могу сказать сейчас, я бегаю как ультра-трейл-марафон, может быть, 100 километров, и в горах вообще. И поэтому я решил тренироваться здесь, потому что, прекрасные горы. Сейчас, может быть, почти каждый день я езжу на велосипеде на Медею, и тогда я гуляю или бегаю на Шимбулак, и на Шимбулаке я пишу книгу. Может быть, после обеда я как делать скитурит, или я катаюсь на лыжах, и тогда обратно. И это как отличная тренировка.
Да, классно. Просто до Люка мы не знали с Акбаром о скайранинг комьюнити, о в целом то, что он существует в Казахстане, и мы не ценили эту особенность в Алматы. То есть мы живем в Алматы, работаем, и не знаем то, что на 20 минутах есть горы, и есть, вот, условно, мы бегали, не бегали, а были частью Амангельды-забега, видели, как он проходил. Мы живем тут уже, в Казахстане там всю жизнь, в Алматы уже 5 лет. И мы не знали о том, что есть у нас Амангельды-забег, и то, что он на протяжении 40 лет, если бы Люк нам не показал. И нам стало даже очень это стыдно. Да. То есть мы, как местные люди, не знаем об нашей уникальности и не ценим этого. А приезжают люди с Испании, с Китая, с России, с Англии. И для них это шок, то, что такие высокие горы в таком расположении. И все это доступно для всех людей, для всех любителей. И вот Люк нам открыл это сообщество скайранеров. Мы вот за один день просто...
Я рад.
Спасибо большое за то, что вообще нас позвал, потому что мы хоть и устали, мы... дисклеймер, мы поднимались там 3 часа где-то с Акбаром, устали, и там 30 минут буквально Люк пробегает эту дистанцию в летних кроссовках.
Нет.
Без подготовки.
Без подготовки.
Еще потом прибегает первым.
Да.
Ой, пятым.
Пятым.
Первым ты в своей возрастной категории прибежал.
Это 5 место было, да, по-моему.
Но все же, и в этот момент я понял, мне захотелось больше ходить в горы, больше быть в контексте этих всех мероприятий, потому что действительно классно, и после гор мы очень вдохновленные пришли, хоть и устали, но вот еще мы познакомились с Сумкаром, кажется, да, Сумкар, они отправлялись, был small talk, и они сказали, что мы хотим отправить первую женщину-казашку на Эверест. Да. Вау, то есть, я не знал, что это происходит.
Это круто, да. И тоже мне очень нравится, как... я чувствую себя, это очень круто. Я очень рад, когда я вижу, люди бегают в горах. И, даже потому, что здесь это не так обычно сейчас, я думаю, что это более круто, чем в Англии. В Англии тоже есть культура бегать или гулять в горах. Я думаю, что здесь, и тоже, когда я был в Ливане, тоже есть как, чуть-чуть маленькие, может быть, как среднее сообщество, развивает. И это очень круто, по-моему.
Какая самая большая дистанция, которую ты пробегал за свою жизнь?
118 километров.
118 километров.
Да, сейчас да. Кто знает, в будущем, наверное, я попробую бегать как 160 километров.
А за сколько по времени ушло на тебе 118 километров?
Я сбегал в гонке в Австрии, Моцарт 100 километров, был как 106 километров и 10 час 30 минут было.
Ого, скорость хорошая.
Да.
Crazy.
Да. Достаточно хорошо.
Окей, и, наверное, финальный вопрос этого блока. Какие у тебя вообще сейчас планы, пока ты находишься в Казахстане? Ты тут будешь до марта, да?
Да, точно, да.
И почему до марта?
2 причины. Во-первых, потому что я как причилась 30 лет, можно сказать. Причилась. Или мне будет 30 лет. Как сказать?
Тебе исполнится.
Исполнится,
да. Я исполнюсь.
Closer.
Я исполнюсь 30 лет. И для меня, другая мечта моего была говорить русский свободно до того, как я
исполнится
30 лет. Спасибо. Еще нет, наверное, я не говорю русский свободно до этого, но еще я думаю, что это где я хочу быть на день рождения. И во-вторых, почему до марта, после марта у меня соревнования, забеги в Америке, в Европе. И поэтому мне надо вернуться.
Классно. Будем ждать соревнований.
Будем болеть за тебя.
Вот. Спасибо.
Наверное, финальный блок.
Закончим
Закончим наш подкаст, наш выпуск. С английском, да?
На английском.
Let's
Okay.
switch.
Yeah, let's switch to English and
Yeah.
finalize our episode.
Let's do it.
The question that I was wondering, and I was very interested to ask you, how do you consider now? Would you call cancer a blessing or a curse? Because, in a sense, it hurt you a lot, but it sparked a journey, and it sparked some light in you that you might not have been realizing before that. And what's your opinion?
Yeah, it's a great question, Akbar. And I think I'm enormously lucky to be alive today. And so, like, it's very easy for me to say, like, being alive and having had cancer has taken my life on a different path.
Yeah.
I've taken, I've had some really exciting experiences that I wouldn't have done otherwise. It's given me like a self-belief and a confidence to do projects I'm really passionate about. I have an energy that I didn't have before. I have a self-belief that I didn't have before. And I think I like my life now more than I did before. I'm doing things that I'm much more interested by and I'm passionate about. So there's there are those big benefits that have come from it. But at the same time, if we were to run life through like 100 times, this is perhaps like the one time I'd still be here and able to talk to you, because the other 99 times it would have killed me.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to say, yeah, it's a blessing, but it's only a blessing because I'm still alive. Yeah. But the fact that I am still alive, and also I don't know how much longer I'm gonna live, like, it hasn't come back yet, and that's great, but like there aren't any guarantees. And I've lived a lot longer than I expected to. So, given I'm alive, it feels like it's been a blessing.
Mm-hmm.
But I would hardly go around saying, like, guys, the solution to living a full life is to get diagnosed with cancer and, and then carry on. Like, it only works if you don't think you're going to live. So.
Yeah. And do you think, should people ask themselves the question of what do I want to do before I die more oftenly, or do they have to contemplate more on this on their daily basis?
I think so, but in a positive way. Yeah. I think it's a really powerful question to ask. And I guess the thing is, why should we be scared of the answer? And I think often we're scared of the answer because it will imply change, and often drastic change, because we're not very happy with our lives. So if we start thinking if I was actually going to die in 6 months' time, I'd quit my job. I would, want to do this. I want to do that. It doesn't necessarily mean you'd, want to travel the world, but you'd be like, you can sort of realize that you don't enjoy your life. And I think facing that reality is a really challenging one, because also we build our lives. It's not easy to change your jobs. It's not easy to change where you live, your partners, your friendship groups, if those are things that you want to change. So I think the challenge that implies is a really difficult one. And that's perhaps why it's quite difficult to sort of think, beyond the fact it's unpleasant to think about dying and death at all. Like, I think it's the questions it asks are difficult ones to... Yeah. It's the answers that are difficult.
And in a sense, I think that the answer shouldn't be the drastic change. It might start from small things, like maybe getting outside of your comfort zone a little, maybe talking to the people that you see on a daily basis, but you don't talk because you're afraid they will judge you or something. I feel like it starts from small things.
That's really well put. Yeah, absolutely. Think what are the small things that you can change today, and then what are the big things you might want to change over the next year or 5 years. Definitely.
Okay,
and
to finalize our episode, our 3 main questions that we always ask.
What do you dream about right now?
Yeah.
What's your dream?
What am I dreaming about right now is finishing my book and getting the documentary on the biggest stage that we can.
Do you have a dream that you've been putting off, but you really wanted to do it?
It's a great question. I've been thinking about this because I've been very fortunate to live my main dream. I think one of the dreams I had been putting off was trying to get my Russian fluent. It'd been something I'd been wanting to do since I was like 20. I wrote it in a diary and I was like, before I'm 30, I want to speak fluent Russian and I want to be a professional athlete. And I've done the second, and I realized at the end of last year, like, I want to try and make the first happen. I don't think my Russian is still at that level. So like, it's kind of a bit like, it's not there yet. But I'm glad at least I've taken the steps to sort of work on it.
Yeah, what do you want to do before you die?
It's another great question. I think what I want to do now is, I guess I've been really is inspired the right word? I think it probably is, that there are some amazing stories of people who have had huge challenges and have faced them in like the most incredible way all around the world. And for me, like, I guess part of my thesis in my life is like trying to share the best of human nature and doing that in like sort of trying to discover that and tell those stories through film around the world. So I hope to do kind of more documentaries with different people in countries, like hopefully Iran, Afghanistan, China, and many, many more countries. So like hopefully share those stories of like people who've gone through a very dark time, but can kind of display a lot of light and a lot of hope.
Wow, thank you, man.
Thank you.
Good luck on your journey, and thank you for being our first ever guest on our first ever episode.
Yeah, it's like
podcast.
first ever episode.
Yes.
I've never done it before.
Yeah, we are very nervous actually, but thank you for comforting us with your company, and thank you to everyone who sees this podcast. Спасибо всем, кто посмотрел, кто досмотрел до конца.
Thank you guys. Well, thanks for the opportunity as well to be on it. I'm really excited to see where the podcast goes. Like, the first episode is such an important starting point, but like, yeah, like I'm really excited to see this podcast in 20 episodes and 50 and 100, and like, yeah, I'm sure I'm gonna be looking at it and being like, oh my god, I was so lucky to be a part of this thing that's kind of grown into this much bigger thing. And yeah, so thanks for having me on at the beginning.
You're so nice to be saying that. Thank you, man.
Thank you, man. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it.
На русском.
Да. Спасибо всем, кто досмотрел наш выпуск до конца. Это наш пилотный выпуск. И, как вы видели, это такой для нас выход из зоны комфорта, но это тоже пункт из нашего списка. И надеемся, что после просмотра кто-то задумается о том, что для него важно, о чем он мечтает. И, наверное, чтобы каждый вспомнил о том, что в любой момент, в любой момент жизнь может закончиться. И, наверное, важнее всего вот как раз думать о том, чего бы мы хотели успеть.
Да.
Все.
Ну, спасибо всем.
Всем спасибо.
It's a wrap.